Hola, les saluda Josué de la Academia Costarricense de Estudios Nórdicos Tradicionales. Hoy tenemos el honor de presentar a un invitado cuyo trabajo ha sido fundamental para comprender la formación política, económica y social de Escandinavia en la antigüedad tardía y el periodo vikingo. Dagfinn Skre es un profesor en el Museo de Historia Cultural de la Universidad de Oslo y ha dedicado más de 4 décadas a la investigación de la Escandinavia de la Edad de Hierro, vikinga y medieval. Su trabajo abarca temas como realeza temprana, comercio, urbanización, poder militar y redes de intercambio, y es especialmente reconocido por sus estudios sobre Kaupan y el complejo real de Avaldsnes. Sus investigaciones han contribuido de manera decisiva a replantear cómo entendemos el origen del poder y las estructuras políticas en el norte de Europa. Okay, Dagfinn, thank you for being with us today and taking the time to
Pleasure.
join this interview.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, thank you. Well, Worlds, I first see that you recently published a paper, besides of course, your published book, Northern Routes to Kingship or Kingdoms. You published a paper called Germania very recently, along with five co-authors, around the topic of the Viking Age, I think economics, correct?
That's right. The journal is called Germania, and it's very well. It's the 102nd volume out now, so it's existed for more than 100 years. So I'm very pleased about being able to publish there. It's a well-established channel. Hmm.
Okay. Would you mind sharing a little bit about for the viewers that might be interested in reading it? What it
Yeah,
might be?
well,
Mhm.
the title is Viking Age Economics,
Hmm.
the significance of industrial commodity production. It sounds perhaps a bit technical, but what it's about is that, well, many scholars have written about Scandinavia as if it were an agrarian society solely, or more or less solely. And that the economy was subsistence economy, uh,
Hmm.
good production, and the trade was very limited. What we discuss is evidence of large-scale production, which we find from the second century AD and throughout up until the Middle Ages, up until we trace it until the 10th century. And that's
Okay.
first, it's iron blooming. And in
Hmm.
some regions in Scandinavia, they produce nearly 100 tons of iron annually over
Mm.
several centuries. So that's that's not for their own use, of course. That's commodity production. That's for trading. So
Yeah.
and we can trace the distribution to some extent, and it extended across several regions. And then our main evidence is whetstones for honing, for making sharp edges and needle,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. It's a trivial thing, but everyone needed one because everyone carried a knife, and some carried swords, and women carried needles, and everyone needed a whetstone. And we have evidence that that production started in the early 8th century in Trøndelag, a region in today central Norway, middle Norway, and that
Oh.
it was industrial in scale from the start, and that distribution was long distance, all the way to Jutland, and
Hmm.
and also into the Baltic from the start. And then, so somebody have thought this is a good idea. We need to
Hmm.
produce this on a large scale, and then we can trade it to our partners across Scandinavia. And then they did that, and that says something significant, I think, about the Scandinavian society.
I think today's topic we explore for the viewers to learn a little bit about how political power and early kingship emerged in Scandinavia. That's the topic we are really interested about, how archaeology and how you explore how Roman influence in the book help us rethink uh, ideas that were long based mainly on later literary sources, maybe from Iceland, maybe exploring how leadership, warfare, and authority actually functioned in Scandinavia. So my first question there is, in the book, you argue that the tradition of raising runestones, which is a topic that also we love in here, with commemorative formulas, was inspired by Roman military epitaphs. So, to what extent did these stones function as a practical way to claim land and inheritance rights in public assemblies or things, breaking away from purely oral tribal traditions, which is a breakaway from what we know this Scandinavian culture from being a very oral oriented tradition there.
Well, first of all, I say that runestones were raised over 1,000 years,
Yeah.
and I'm not writing about the later ones, which are the far more numerous ones. In the 11th, 12th century, there were raised hundreds, thousands of runestones, especially in what is today Middle Sweden. But what I'm writing about is the very earliest ones, the ones dated to the late second century
Mm-hmm.
until the sixth. And they are just 50 stones across the Scandinavian peninsula. There are none in Denmark. They all lie across the Scandinavian peninsula on the belt. And
Okay.
so what I've argued then is well, this argument is encapsulated within a wider argument, which rests on many pillars. And the gist of the argument is that in the late second century, flocks of groups of warriors, were Scandinavian warriors who had served in the Roman army as mercenaries, auxiliaries, they were called, were dismissed after winning the Marcomannic War, and then some of them went northwards and settled in Scandinavia. Probably they came from there, many of them at least.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so what I've done in the book is to trace many Scandinavian features which emerge in that period, around 200, back to Roman traditions. And one of them is the custom of raising runestones. And I compared them to the Roman epitaphs, as you said. And in the Roman Empire, the epitaphs had played a very special role. Raising an epitaph in the provinces was to claim, to state publicly that you had paid for the funeral of the dead person. So both the dead person and the raiser of the epitaph are named in the inscription. And so it's not only a commemorative thing, it's also a statement that I have paid for this funeral and for this epitaph, and that by that I claim the inheritance from this deceased person. It's a claim of inheritance according to Roman law. And at that time, there were local, regional laws in the provinces. So inheritance were handled according to those laws. That was a normal thing. But by raising the epitaph, the raisers said that both the dead person and I are Roman citizens, and therefore the handling of this inheritance shall proceed according to Roman law. So it's a legal document.
Mm.
So, and then I asked myself, can the Scandinavian runestones, which emerge, which the earliest one occur in that period, around 200, perhaps a bit before, be an emulation, way of adapting the Roman epitaph to a Scandinavian setting?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that that is likely because they're raised on graves.
Mm-hmm.
They have an inscription which is very often abbreviated, but the formula is similar to the Roman. In
Mm-hmm.
the more extensive inscriptions, both the deceased person and the stone raiser are named.
Right.
So, and then I asked myself, how can this? Well, and there's one more point. They have normally been regarded as very prestigious monuments raised by the tops of society and the richest people, and this is a very prestigious thing. But the thing is that they are not raised in the central, in the best, on the best farm and in the wealthiest, by the wealthiest lineages, but on small farms in peripheral areas.
Mm-hmm.
There is, there is one exception, which is well known, the Tuna stone from around 400. But
Right.
I argue that that is an outlier,
Mm-hmm.
and that most of these 50, the large majority of these 50 stones are raised in small communities on quite small farms.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not wealthy. So why, what kind of, if it is a legal document, what kind of disputes can it have been intended to solve? Um, and then I argue that these mercenaries who had come from the Roman army, they had settled in the best agricultural areas.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't raise runestones there, but they posted, I argue, warriors along important traveling routes, especially along the sea, the coast, but also into valleys where they had production sites and resources out in the woodlands and mountains.
I
Uh,
think, and we have evidence for that, right? For that,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. There is evidence for such production sites and also for the transport route, the routes along
Mm-hmm.
the coast. So that's well evidenced. And so I find that I go through all the 50 stones and see that they align, well, for the vast majority, it's pretty evident that they lie along these routes. So
Mm-hmm.
the argument then is that lords living in the lush regions, the rich regions, the good agricultural regions, they post warriors along the routes to oversee transport and to protect transport of goods and people. And
Oh.
these warriors they are given small farms, which the lord claims. And
Mm-hmm.
then when one of them dies, what happens then? Well, then the heir must claim uh, inheritance according to lordly rights, not
Mm-hmm.
to the local ancient tribal rights, but that this is inheritance which should be uh, given to me. I name myself, and I claim that according to lordly rights.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my interpretation of how these warriors used the Roman experience about why and how epitaphs were carved. And they used the newly invented the runic alphabet to claim their rights to land.
Okay. So can we argue also that they have experienced, these warriors also had experience trading, commerce, with commerce?
Oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the provinces, Roman provinces, the military camps were uh, lying particularly along the borders, the limes, and
Mm-hmm.
around these military camps, which housed thousands of men, they
Mm-hmm.
there was lots. They grew up small markets and some places towns
Mhm.
because the military bought lots of stuff.
Mhm.
These men had to be supplied, and there was good trade to be made in the vicinity of these camps. And also, when the warriors were had some spare time, there were bars
Mhm.
and guest houses and things like that, where they could trade and buy and drink and have a bit of fun. So they learned to use money,
Mm.
and they learned to trade, how trade happened. And this
Mm.
experience, which they lived there for if they served their full period, they lived there for 25 years. And even if some of them were on shorter contracts and were dismissed after victories, then they would have sufficient experience to know what money is about, what coinage is about, how you can use it, and how it works, and
Yeah.
also trading relation and that kind of thing. And they used a series of these experiences from the camps and from the surrounding communities to when they came back to Scandinavia.
Excellent. So that means well, that partially answers question three, because my next question, um, it suggests that former Roman auxiliaries introduced new systems of command and communication into Scandinavia, but has traditional historiography might have underestimated this cross-cultural influence
Yeah.
by, insisting on the Germanic origins from that Tacitus mentioned.
Well, I think that the Tacitus may have something to do with it, but I think the reason why many archaeologists, not all, but many,
Mhm.
have underestimated the interaction between Scandinavia and the Roman Empire
Mhm.
is that after this period, in the late 6th and 7th century, there was after the Roman Empire withdrew from the Western Roman Empire collapsed.
Mhm.
Um, there was a downfall, economic and culturally, in Western Europe. And
Mhm.
commerce suffered, production suffered, people suffered. There was a decline, dramatic decline. And uh, we often call those types of processes, well, one thing that characterizes such processes is regionalization,
Mhm.
that regions become more isolated from each other. Large, long distance connections collapse, and
Mhm.
people interact mainly within their own region. They don't travel far
Mhm.
because it's dangerous, and trading hubs don't exist anymore, and lots of things like that. So, and that happened in the late 6th and 7th century across Europe, across Western Europe. And
Oh.
so in that period, Scandinavia became more isolated from the continent.
Mhm.
And this lasted until the 9th century when the Viking Age started. And then
Mhm.
Scandinavia was reconnected to the continent
Mhm.
and to the British Isles.
Do you think that the kingship and the newly emerged kingdoms during the Viking Age influenced this that you just mentioned, that they
Yeah,
became mm,
yeah, they were more a result, I think. The three kingdoms which emerged in the Viking Age were a result of this process.
mm,
One may say that the one Viking archaeologists and historians often say that in the Viking Age, Scandinavia became a part of Europe. And I accept that, but I say became a part of Europe again. It had been before, but that is
mhm,
overlooked. It had been that in the second, third, fourth, fifth, and into the 6th century. It had been a part of Europe.
mm,
But then this decline, economic and socially, in every sense, in the
Hmm.
sixth and seventh century, made a split, a regionalization of Europe.
And
And
of course affected Scandinavia in a way that they became isolated during
mm,
that period and then became again, like you're saying,
yeah,
integrated in the Viking Age. Okay. Yeah.
again, and
Hmm.
that now we became a part of Europe. Experience has been projected back in time. That Scandinavia had always been isolated from the continent, and that's
Hmm.
a mistaken in my mind. There was a cut, but before that there was extensive contact. So the relation to the Roman Empire was fresh and intense from around 200 onwards.
Okay. That's great.
So that
So
I hope that was an answer to your question.
it is and beyond. That is great. I'm loving this answers. Just for the viewers to be aware, we're talking about the book that was released called The Northern Routes to Kingship. And at the beginning, we mentioned Germania, which is a recently published paper. We discussed about that. Both links will be put in the description of the video so that people can read and read about it and learn and but beware, it is a quite large book, more than 800 pages, so uh, take your
I,
time to read it.
670 pages, I think.
600, okay,
But
yeah.
of course, this is a scholarly book.
Hmm.
But as always, I've made my best to write it in a plain language,
Yeah.
meaning that try to avoid scholarly jargon and that kind of thing. And
Mm,
so, if you're interested, more than normally interested in Scandinavia in this period, and used to reading, then it's absolutely, you don't need to be a scholar to read it, I'm sure.
that's see, yeah, yeah, and what you mentioned is reflected there because you can read it, any person can read it, or a person that have read a bit of Viking Age can also
Mm.
read it there. So excellent.
Mm.
Um, so in the book, now the kingdoms, you suggest that some kingdoms may have formed when migrant subgroups split off from the larger community. How does this tell us about political fragmentation and the
Mm.
formation of earlier powers in Scandinavia
Mm.
during, especially during the 5th century?
Yeah. Well, we're not now talking, as you say, about the fifth and early sixth centuries. Uh,
Yes.
and that's not when the three Scandinavian kingdoms were formed. Only
Mm,
one of them goes back to that period, the kingdom of the Danes. Uh,
mm,
but elsewhere in Scandinavia, there were, I argue, many kingdoms were formed in this period, maybe as many as 15, small and large. Um, so, what I argue then is that when these warrior groups came back around 200 and settled,
mm,
that they started a very turbulent period in Scandinavian history because to do it, to do what they wanted, namely to live the warrior life, they needed to cooperate for
mm,
trade and such, and for organizing expeditions and that kind of thing. But they were warriors,
mm,
and they didn't trust each other, or to a limited extent. So there was a culture of treachery, alliances, friendships, broken friendships, raiding, revenge, that kind of thing. And we see that in the evidence because there's no period in Scandinavia where so many fortifications have been built. There are some 1,700 fortifications built mainly across the peninsula.
mm,
Um, and and also in the south, there are lots and lots of what they call armament deposits. That is, after there have been battles between armies, and one of them, the victorious ones, stripped the killed warriors of the opponent for
mhm,
their equipment, clothes, weapons, everything, and they sacrifice it in a lake. Um, and I think there are about 50 such depositions known in southern Scandinavia. That is mostly present-day Denmark. And so
okay.
this is a really, really turbulent time. And those depositions, they end in the mid 5th century. So why
Mm,
do they end? Well, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. There was little more trade, at least a sharp economic decline because trade was going down and production wasn't going so well. And they had to find new ways of organizing themselves. They couldn't continue doing
mhm,
these things.
mm,
There was not so much to fight about.
yeah.
So what I argue then is that a large kingdom is established in southern Scandinavia, the Danish ones,
Mm,
modeled on the Roman Empire, because it had one ruler, like the Roman Empire. It had hereditary succession that lies in the term kingdom. King means
mhm,
man from a prominent lineage. So it is a lineage which produces kings. So it's
mm,
hereditary. And the third thing is that it has a fixed territory. All these things were new compared to the earlier period when these warrior groups ruled Scandinavia.
And that thing I
So
can already imagine the chaos because you see, you have the tribal laws and tribal ways, and then you have the more formal or the more the correct how do you call the correct way of doing political things from Rome. And I can already imagine, no, we have to do with the tribal. We have our tribal laws and tribal ways, and you cannot come here and take over. I can imagine the during the 5th century, 6th century, the chaos between the people there and the
yeah,
fighting. Mm,
but it appears that they managed to solve these conflicts. There were two types of polities, as you say. There
mm,
were the tribes, and then there were these lords. And
mhm,
it seems that they managed to merge
mhm,
into kingdoms.
mhm,
Because, well, as I said, the kingdoms had a fixed territory. They were territorial.
mhm,
Um, Lordships were more like network organizations. They had a center, and then they had connections to the production sites, and they had transport routes to trading sites and that kind of thing.
mhm,
But when trade declined, then routes were less important, of course.
mhm,
So and territorial territories became more important, and it seems that the territoriality of the tribes and the warriors' knowledge of territoriality in the Roman Empire sort of merged into the kingdom as a
mhm.
new type of polity.
Oh,
So that's at least one way of seeing it.
mhm,
Um, but
yeah,
it is a very complex transition, and in the book I try to follow several threads through that transition, and
right.
some warrior institutions were also uh, taken on onwards from the lordships and into kingdoms. For instance, the sworn relationship, which was the basis for the warrior groups. There was a lord, and his men swore loyalty to him, and that was
Mm-hmm.
taken into the kingdom as a relation between the king and his sworn uh, men uh,
Oh,
who ruled parts of the country.
it was carried over to the
Yeah,
kingdoms.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's
So
it's.
kingdoms were rooted in both the tribal societies
Mhm.
and in the lordships, sort of merging of institutions into one new type of polity.
Okay.
Mm.
Great. So the last question of this interview, it is about, you see, you also mentioned there the construction of inhabited fortresses while the armies were campaigning suggest long-term planning, that this is actually a
Mm.
long-term thinking and planning, organizing. To what extent does this kind of organization allows us to speak or to argument of an early form of a military state,
Yeah,
or military? Hmm.
yeah. That's the inhabited fortresses is a peculiar type, and they're especially numerous in the two Baltic islands, Gotland and Åland. And they are very, especially in Åland, they're fantastic monuments even today. And
Hmm.
they appear to have been become inhabited not initially, but in the 5th century. Uh,
Mm,
and so this took time. And what I argue then is that in these islands lived what I call militarized tribes. They became
hmm,
no lords were allowed to enter there and establish themselves there because they were martial. They had a high competence. These tribes had a high martial competence. They were good fighters, good warriors. Um,
hmm,
from early on, they start. You find warrior graves there, numbers of warriors graves very early, before 200, and
hmm,
so they were militarized tribes, I argue. So
hmm,
you can you may you ask about you use the word state. I'm There are different scholarly traditions about how to use the word state, and I'm not very fond of using that word at this early stage in this early period because
hmm,
it demands high degree of institutionalization, I think,
hmm,
and formal arrangement like archives and that kind of written culture and that kind of thing. In my way of thinking, but I
hmm,
know archaeologists in the Americas use state about very early social formations. So. I would say that in these islands, Gotland and Åland, they were highly militarized from an uh, early period, um, and they were polities. I would
hmm.
say the tribes were militarized polities, but I wouldn't use the word state.
State.
No, no.
Okay.
States. Scandinavian states, I would say, is 12th, 13th century. Yeah.
Wow. Very, very later on. Very, very
Well,
later on.
much later, yes. But that's
Hmm.
a personal preference. There's nothing wrong about using it for earlier periods. It's just different scholarly traditions.
Now, something you mentioned about archaeology there. So, so I think that I heard you saying the graves of these warriors were near these inhabited fortresses, militarized fortresses.
These islands are not so big,
Mm,
so there will always be graves in the vicinity. And in Öland, which is the smallest of these two, there are
Hmm.
not large distances between the warrior cemeteries and or
Hmm.
cemeteries with warrior graves and the fortresses.
Hmm.
So what I argue then is that these islands had one army each,
Hmm.
the tribe's army, and they went for expeditions on the continent, and they fought with the Goths in and extracted gold coinage from the Roman Empire as tribute for as payment for the services fighting with
Hmm.
the Romans,
Okay.
or for keeping peace with the Romans. They were paid not to fight with the Romans. So they brought gold coinage, large quantities of gold coinage back to Ireland and Gotland, and they've been found there in large quantities, more than anywhere else in Scandinavia. And
Okay.
what I argue then is that they built these inhabited fortresses so that those
Hmm.
who did not go on follow the army
Hmm.
abroad, so to say, could shelter them,
Hmm.
so that they could defend themselves, even though they were quite few. Uh,
I
that's
do.
that's my argument. Mm.
Oh, okay. Really thought-provoking. Okay, that's great. Well, Dagfinn, thank you for this interview. I really think that people will look at it, watch it again, and watch it again because it requires, um, rethinking and maybe you see, mm, based on archaeology, like actually think for themselves, oh, we have this evidence, and maybe, come to conclusions on their own.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I would love that. I like. I hope I can stimulate this individual thinking, because
The- mhm.
that's what my scholarly work or academic scholarly work on the past is really about. Uh,
Mhm.
Inspiring people to think by themselves.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Really, real pleasure having you here, Daphne. Thank you for your time.